Hello, my name is Linde, and I'm a Trekkie. You'll notice, of course, I copied my title from the trademark Alcoholics Anonymous introduction. Yes, for me, Star Trek has been something of an addiction, maybe even a crutch through the years, but really I'm nothing like an addict. I mean, I can give up Star Trek anytime I want. And another thing about my title is, yes, it's Trekkie, and I'm kind of, serious about that. That means Kirk and Spock and Dr. McCoy and the rest of the crew of the USS Enterprise, boldly going where no man had gone before in the 1960s. And I emphasize the Trekkie part because a couple of decades ago there was this sort of a movement to relabel the term to Trekker, which I kind of thought was annoying. Apparently, there were some fans, and I actually blame the next generation for this, the 80s incarnation of the TV show that starred the bald Shakespearean actor Patrick Stewart. Anyway, those fans wanted to be taken more seriously. And I thought, really? I mean, we're following a science fiction television show from the 60s like it's gospel, and you're worried about that, like an IE, substituting an ER for an IE is going to make you seem less nerdy. So, no, I was a Trekkie from the old school, Kirk, Spock, Bones, and partly it's because they were there for me when I was a kid. Especially as a youngster, I had been one of the cool kids, but about my freshman year, I kind of started to put on weight. And as I got heavier and heavier, I started to feel kind of self-conscious about hanging around with the rest of the other cool kids. And in fact, the low point, and maybe I should say the high point if you're talking about the bathroom scale, came when I was cast as Tubby the Elf in the high school Christmas play. I embraced the role, and it was given to me by a teacher, believe it or not, the theater teacher. And, I kind of like to think that these days he would have probably gotten fired for that. But as I lost some of the cool kids as my friends, every afternoon I still had my real friends, Kirk and Spock, and the others. From 4 to 5 o'clock on syndicated television, I could be counted on to be there in my parents' basement, glued to that old black and white TV, and watching it. And it was, it was cheesy special effects, and it was, styrofoam rocks and space babes in the metallic skirts with the go-go boots and all. But, you have to remember it was also exploration, and there were stories of diversity and adventure, and it was just pure escapism that really made some of those uncomfortable times a little easier. So, if Star Trek had faded into obscurity in the 70s, I might have forgotten about it. But it didn't. Legions of fans loved the thing, even more than I did, some of them, and they clamored for its return, and they did so, one of the ways was by conventions. I started figuring out that thousands of Trekkies would gather in a convention, and they'd trade comics and Star Trek novels, and they'd wear goofy costumes, kind of like me here. That was me in my Captain Kirk Command Gold tunic. And I found out pretty quickly that that's what really separated the men from the boys, or you might say the red shirts from the gold shirts in the Star Trek world, was if you'd been to a convention, then you were a pretty serious fan. And yeah, I went to 3. At the conventions, you could do stuff like play Star Trek Jeopardy, where you could watch middle-aged men get red-in-the-face mad if you couldn't remember Captain Kirk's serial number from Starfleet, or if you didn't know what Spock's blood type was, which I do, by the way. It's T negative, in case you were wondering. So you could also see Star Trek celebrities at conventions, and in the 70s I saw Gene Roddenberry, the creator of Star Trek, and that was at a convention down at the old McNichols Arena, if you remember that. Lets you know how long ago that was. In the 80s, I met Chekhov and Spock's dad. But probably my best brush with greatness came actually just when I was traveling. And I was going with my husband to Toronto, Canada. And we had landed and we were going through immigrations and customs in Toronto. And I looked ahead of me and we were pretty sure that up ahead of us was Scotty, Chief Engineer Montgomery Scott from the Enterprise. And I got pretty excited. I was pretty sure it was him, but not quite, and hoping to maybe speed up in line so we could catch up to him. And we got up to the immigration official, and of course, I can't wait. I'm like, hey, the man ahead of us in line there, wasn't that Scotty? And he says, no. I said, no, really, it really looked like him. Are you sure that wasn't, Scotty from Star Trek, Chief Engineer Montgomery Scott? And he said, no. And I realized, finally, I said, no, was it James Doohan, the actor who played Scotty? And he looks at his papers and goes, oh, yeah. Yeah, it was. It was obviously not a Trekkie or even a Trekker. And so I was really disappointed, but believe it or not, about 2 days later, in the hotel that we were in Toronto, I'm walking through the hotel lobby, and I walk past the hotel drugstore, and there, through the glass, into the drugstore, who do I see but Scotty? And he's in there, buying some personal items. And before I can even think to stop myself, I just turn on my heel and I spin in and I just walk in there, and he was in an aisle where he was just trapped. And I walked straight up to him and I say, hello, Mr. Doohan, I'm a Trekkie. And, at this point, my husband, who was kind of following at a safe distance, says the guy looked like a deer in the headlights, pretty literally. But I just said, I just wanted to talk to you, thank you. Star Trek has really meant a lot to me in my life, and I just wanted to shake your hand and say thank you. And he was actually very gracious. He kind of put down the laxatives or whatever it was he had, and he shook my hand, and he was very nice. And that was a real high point for me. I have to say, of course, Scotty has beamed up permanently to the final frontier. But that was a memorable brush with greatness in my Star Trek world. As I grew up, actually, I didn't really slow down with the costumes, especially at Halloween. I forced my family to participate, and my poor children really got the brunt of it when they were just too little to protest. Here we are with my youngest daughter. Because she was bald until she was 3, it was really pretty easy to pull off the Captain Picard from The Next Generation with her. And so that was good. A little bit later, my oldest, Margaret, is in the next picture, and she made just a really cute, she was a Klingon. She was dressed up as a Klingon, which in the Federation are ferocious enemies of Starfleet. But I thought she made a really cute Klingon, if there can be, such a contradiction in terms. Speaking of Klingons, that also brings to mind an encounter that I had with one in Las Vegas, of all places. We took a trip, family and several coworkers went to Las Vegas, and I insisted that our first stop be at the Hilton Hotel, which at that time had an attraction called the Star Trek Experience. And they had a transporter and a shuttlecraft and everything, and this completely believable bridge of the Enterprise where we were strolling around. So a friend of mine and I, we were walking around. Steve Clark, he's a closet Trekkie, but I've outed him now. And so anyway, we were in there, and we look up to see this just larger-than-life Klingon walking through the bridge of the Enterprise. And he really looked like the real deal with the wrinkly forehead and everything. And once again, before even thinking, I just yell out some of the only Klingon I know, which was "Kabla!" And he stops, and he hears his native tongue, and he turns around and he walks over to me, and he walks up to me and he just says, "Bak Klingon daka korchbada." And I used up all the Klingon I knew. And so I said, I kind of laughed a little bit weakly. And he bent down and he growled, continue your practice. And so I, waved, and I think there's a picture here. Steve and I, Steve, I think, still looks a little bit rattled. So, well, one of my actual favorite Star Trek themed experiences was about 15 years ago, and it relates to having been diagnosed with cancer, actually a tumor above my eye. It was in the fall of the year, as I said, about 15 years ago. And I know that you read in these advertisements and promotions that you would hear stories that inspire, and you certainly have. And I think when it comes to my story, that last statement that I just made is really about the most inspirational thing in it, which was that I can stand here and say, oh yeah, 15 years ago, I had cancer. And I think that's really thanks to the fact that local doctors and oncologists like my doctor, Doug Kemme, could do things even then like cure cancer. And so anyway, I find that that's what's really inspiring in this story, is that I can stand here now and talk about my goofy Star Trek obsession with that in the rearview mirror 15 years ago. But anyway, when that cancer diagnosis came in, it was the fall, and I started the chemo and the radiation and all that, and my hair started falling out just about Halloween. So it was coming up on Halloween, and I busted out the razor, and I shaved bald, and I decided this was my year to go as Jean-Luc Picard, the bald captain of the Enterprise in the Next Generation. So in those years, the best party in town at Halloween was downtown here at the Rio. And so I put on my Star Trek uniform, and I shined up my head a little bit, and I went down there, and it was kind of fun because outside of my family and friends, there weren't very many people who knew what was going on, why I was bald. So it was just wonderful to walk in there and have these people look at me with this realization like, oh my God, this woman shaved her head for a Star Trek costume. And I honestly can't remember if there was a contest, and if so, who won. But I just knew that, and I remember it as a great opportunity to display the ultimate authenticity in my panoply of Star Trek costumes and experiences. So this year, 2016, believe it or not, marks the 50th anniversary of Star Trek. And I know that you'll be hearing a lot more about it, and there'll be movies and specials and this and that, but I just enjoyed telling you my stories about Star Trek, and in the words of Mr. Spock, peace, live long and prosper.